Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Everything Within podcast. I'm your host, Alina Krasnojon. Every episode is a doorway back to yourself, back to your truth, back to who you were before the world told you who to be, because everything you've ever needed has always been within you. Thank you for tuning in today. You don't look like most Ukrainian women. That was one of the first things someone told me after I moved to France. What they said was, you don't have the inflated lips, the reconstructed face, the particular aesthetic that had become in the Western imagination what a Ukrainian woman looks like. Said casually, said as a compliment even. The assumption so complete it didn't occur to them to question it for a second. Before I moved abroad, I already felt something was deeply off with the way women around me existed in the world. Being a woman felt like being permanently evaluated. Your weight, your face, your clothes, whether you were aging well enough, feminine enough, doing enough to remain desirable. Nobody asked for permission to comment on any of it. And underneath every comment was the same message. Your body is a public conversation, and everyone is entitled to an opinion except you. I felt all of this growing up. I didn't just have the full picture yet. It wasn't until I arrived in France that the box became visible from the outside, and I finally understood what I had been living inside all along. Because the moment you leave, you realize the box was already built before you got there. You didn't walk into it, you were placed in it. Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, Romanian, it doesn't matter, you are Eastern European. And Eastern European means something very specific in a Western imagination, something that has very little to do with who you actually are. I lived inside that box for years. This episode is about what that box is, who built it, who profits from it, who reinforces it, and what it actually costs the women placed inside it. Let's begin. And to understand how the box got built, you have to look at who built it and why. When I was a student and desperately needed money, I worked briefly for one of these marriage agencies. My job was to translate, sitting between young Ukrainian women who spoke no English and middle-aged Western men on the other side of a screen. The women were in their 20s searching for a way out of financial precarity. The men were 40, 50, sometimes older. I lasted a few weeks. It was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. What was underneath the romantic framing? A market with a buyer and a product. The industry is not hidden. The forums, the dating tours to Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, men flying in specifically to meet women who have been preselected for youth, appearance, and willingness. What these men say they want openly is a traditional woman. Young, beautiful, grateful, compliant. And traditional here means a preference for compliance and ego reinforcement. For a woman who is dependent enough so she can't afford to make demands, cannot afford to live, cannot afford to be anything other than grateful. And these men, they're not as a rule men with abundant options at home. They're often emotionally underdeveloped, sometimes cruel, frequently unable to sustain relationships with women their own age, who know themselves well enough to see them clearly. So they go looking for someone younger, someone whose prefrontal cortex is still developing, who hasn't yet accumulated enough experience to recognize what she's looking at. A 22-year-old is not naive because she's stupid. She's naive because she's 22. They know this. That is precisely why they choose her. The transactional nature of this goes both ways, and they know that too. You cannot select a woman purely for her looks and youth and then be shocked when she's also making a practical calculation. The transaction is mutual. The difference is that only one side gets called a gold digger for it. Every Eastern European woman who arrives in the West carries the shadow of this industry, whether she has anything to do with it or not. She becomes a category before she becomes a person, a type. And once that category exists, it does its work automatically. You don't have to do anything to be placed inside it. You open your mouth and the accent is enough. You mention where you're from, and the assumption is already forming. The box precedes you everywhere you go. The first thing the box does is erase where you actually come from. Ukrainian, Russian, Polish, Romanian, Moldovan, centuries of different histories, languages, cultures, trauma, entirely distinct identities, flattened into one interchangeable label, Eastern European. And before that, for a long time, it was even simpler. Everyone was Russian. The specificity of who you actually are, where you actually from, what that place actually means, none of it registers. You're a category, a type. Inside that category, there are 3 boxes. And most Western people, whether they realize it or not, are reaching for one of them the moment they encounter you. The first box is the trophy wife. Beautiful, decorative, grateful. Her role is to reflect well on a man besides her, to be the evidence of his success, his taste, his ability to attract something rare and lovely. She's not expected to have opinions. She's not expected to be complex. The second box is the gold digger, the assumption that she can't possibly want him for himself, that there must be a calculation underneath, a strategy, an angle. What this erases entirely is context, the poverty that in many cases was real, the options that were genuinely few, the lifetime of being taught that beauty is the only currency she has, and that access to financial security runs exclusively through men. People love a simple explanation. It requires less of them than understanding. And I'm not saying every woman in these situations is making purely innocent choices, but if you go one layer deeper, beyond the easy judgment, you will find something that deserves more compassion than contempt. The third box is the prostitute. This one requires the least, just the accent, the looks, the country of origin. It attaches regardless of who she is, what she does, how she carries herself, what she has built. It follows her into professional spaces and social situations. The Eastern European women who came to the West, learned the language, built careers, created full and independent lives, they're still placed in the box. The stereotype doesn't care about the reality of who you are. It just keeps following you everywhere. The box doesn't exist in a vacuum. It was built to receive women who were already prepared for it long before they ever left home. Because the question nobody asks when they reach for the gold digger label or the trophy wife assumption is, how did she get there? What was she taught? What options did she actually have? The answer is almost never stupidity, almost never weakness. It is poverty, misery, and abusive households. Options that are genuinely few, and a lifetime, often several lifetimes, passed from mother to daughter to granddaughter of being taught physical beauty is the only asset a woman has, and that financial security is something you access through a man, not something you built yourself. This generational conditioning is woven into everything around you. I remember being asked by my relatives if I didn't want to make my lips bigger, comments that lifting weights was making me too masculine, the constant question about children. But underneath every one of those comments was the same message. Your value is physical, it is visible, and it is your responsibility to protect it. Because the women who grew up in this system know in their bodies that beauty is temporary, that it fades, that it is by definition something that cannot be controlled or held onto. When that is the only currency you have been given, the obsession with maintaining it becomes absolute. You're trying to protect your only investment. The money through men doctrine is taught to girls from birth. When you are raised to believe that financial security is not something you earn, but something a man grants you, you become structurally dependent in a way that touches everything. It creates women who stay in relationships. They want to live because they have no money, no career, nowhere to go. Women who tolerate what should not be tolerated because the alternative is survival precarity. Many of these women who end up in these dynamics didn't choose precarity, they came from it. They grew up in chaotic or abusive households where love and instability were the same thing. As adults, they don't consciously choose the same dynamic. They are simply drawn to what feels familiar. The nervous system moves toward what it recognizes. The people who activate their unhealed wounds feel like home, feel like intensity, feel like love, because that is what love looked and felt like when they were children. It is not a choice. It is a wound looking for resolution in the wrong place. And when she arrives in a foreign country without fluency in the language, the trap closes further. You cannot read a man clearly across a cultural gap, across a language barrier, across mentality. You are still learning to understand. You miss things. You misunderstand things. You misread things. And isolation from language, from community, from financial independence keeps the dynamic in place. Understanding all of this does not excuse the system that created it, doesn't make the man who exploited it less responsible. Both things are true at the same time. And then there is a layer that is harder to talk about because it comes from inside. While all of this is happening, while the box is being built and maintained by Western men and the industry that serves them, there are Eastern European women on social media with hundreds of thousands of followers actively performing the stereotype. The soft, mysterious, traditional, feminine Slavic woman as aesthetic. Called beauty, natural elegance, traditional values. It gets views, it gets followers, it gets the attention of exactly the man the market created. And most of it is produced without any apparent reflection on what is actually doing or what image of Eastern European women it is cementing in the minds of everyone watching. The content is specific, soft life, feminine energy, be taken care of, waiting for a man who leads, provides, protects. It repackages dependency as empowerment, passivity as spiritual femininity, waiting for a provider as wisdom, and underneath the aesthetic, the linen dresses, the effortless beauty, the quiet traditional life is a very clear message. Use the man as a resource. His wallet, his status, his provision. Expect to be treated like a princess, have rigid, non-negotiable expectations of what he must offer. When you position a man purely as a financial resource, a provider, a wallet with legs, you cannot then be surprised when he positions you as a physical resource in return. A beautiful face, a compliant body, a decorative presence. The transaction cuts both ways. You can absolutely have standards, but when the relationship is built on the rigid exchange of her femininity for his resources from the beginning, it was never not transactional. And transactional relationships have a logic that is very hard to escape once you are inside them. The harm this content does is real, particularly to young Eastern European women watching it and absorbing it as identity, as the correct way to be, as what makes them desirable, valuable, worth choosing. It becomes their blueprint. These women are not the villains of the story, they are products of the same conditioning I have spent this entire episode describing, navigating real economic precarity, using the tools the system gave them, optimizing for what the algorithm rewards. The uncomfortable truth is that the system created the demand and they're supplying it, but that does not make the content harmless. When you keep transmitting these messages without ever questioning your own conditioning, without ever asking what you're actually selling and to whom, you become a part of the machine, even if you started out as one of its victims. The line between celebrating genuine femininity and performing a stereotype for views and male consumption has become almost impossible to see from the inside. All of this conditioning, the good girl programming, the money through man doctrine, the performance of perfect femininity eventually lands in relationships, and it produces a very specific dynamic. She gives everything, asks for nothing, centers him completely, his needs, his moods, his comfort, his life. And Slavic women do this without anyone asking them to. It is not a conscious choice. It is conditioning that feels like love, like devotion, like simply being a good partner. She cooks, she manages, she supports, she shows up, and slowly, without noticing, she disappears. Her ambition quietly set aside, her friendships neglected, her own needs, desires an interior life shrinking until there is almost nothing left of her and that isn't organized around him. And when a woman does this, when she makes a man the entire center of her world, something predictable happens. He stops seeing her, sometimes not even consciously, but because that is what happens when someone is always there, always giving, always available. He takes it for granted. Often nobody even asked her to overextend herself this way. The conditioning did, and he benefits from it without even having to acknowledge it. The repressed needs doesn't disappear, they go underground and they come back as resentment and bitterness, as a slow accumulation of everything she never asked for and never received. And then she wonders, as do so many women, why she keeps attracting selfish, egotistical men who take everything and offer nothing, because she built a dynamic that demanded nothing of them, that required zero effort, zero change, zero reciprocity. She trained them through her own selflessness to treat her as someone who doesn't need anything, and they believed her. When you have nothing of your own, no money, no career, no friendship that exist independently of him, no life outside the relationship, you cannot leave. And when you cannot leave, you will be treated accordingly, whether the man is conscious of it or not. Everyone knows when someone has no exit. And people, even good people, behave differently towards someone they know will stay regardless. That is why I will say it plainly, always be willing to walk away, even in the best relationship. Have your own money, your own friends, your own interests, ambitions, and inner life that have nothing to do with him. Because a woman who could live, who has a full life of her own, who is choosing him rather than trapped by him, is a woman who gets treated completely differently. A man will not value what costs him nothing. He won't. And when the relationship ends, as it sometimes does, when it was built on this foundation, the devastation is total, because everything was him. When he goes, the whole world goes with him, especially if she built zero financial independence. She doesn't just lose a partner, she loses her entire identity and her survival structure at the same time. So why does she do it? Why put everything into one man and keep nothing for yourself? Because she was taught that keeping something for yourself is selfish, that having boundaries make you difficult, that a woman who prioritizes herself is a bitch. And at some point, if you want to become a woman who knows her worth, who cannot be emptied out, who chooses from fullness rather than fear, you have to be willing to be called a bitch. You have to make peace with that word. That is the narrative that circulates constantly in certain male spaces and increasingly in mainstream ones. Western women are too difficult, too demanding, too feminist, too aggressive. Eastern European women, the story goes, are different. Real women, grateful, feminine, uncomplicated, agreeable, gentle, beautiful. They know how to treat a man. What this framing does is turn women against each other across cultures and continents, while allowing men to never once examine their own expectations. The problem is never what they demand, it is always women's failure to provide it. Western women failed by developing opinions and independence. Eastern European women are praised for not having done so yet. It is not a compliment, it is a management strategy. Western women absorb this too. This is a subtle shame that creeps in about being too much, too loud, having too much boundaries, being too willing to perform softness on demand. The comparison is weaponized. If you were more like her, things would be easier, and some women believe it. They soften themselves to avoid the label. Eastern European women, on the other hand, often internalize the comparison as superiority. We know how to treat a man. We don't have those Western feminist problem. We expect men to pay, to bring flowers, to take care of us, and we look after ourselves in return. Western women had let themselves go, stopped being feminine, stopped appreciating men. This is said with pride, without seeing that it is the conditioning speaking, that expecting a man to pay for everything while performing femininity in return is not freedom. It is the transaction again and the same doctrine. The truth underneath all of this is simple. Both groups of women are being managed, just with different tools. Western women are shamed into softening, Eastern European women are flattered into compliance. The goal in both cases is the same: a woman whose energy is directed toward being chosen rather than towards herself. So what does it look like to refuse all of this? It starts with money. Financial independence is not optional. It is the foundation of everything. Before a long-term relationship, before moving in with anyone, before making your life legible to another person's plans, build your own financial ground first. Never abandon your dreams for a man. Never. I say this knowing how conditioned I was to do exactly that, how deep the programming runs, how much I am still learning to undo it. I see clearly now how I was shaped to be unable to survive in this world alone, how dependency was built into me as if it were natural, as if needing a man to function was simply how women were. It is not. It is something that was constructed carefully over a long time, and it can be deconstructed. It also looks like taking up space, speaking your mind openly, without performing softness to make it more palatable, refusing to perform gratitude simply for existing, stopping the performance of femininity, the procedures, the hair, the carefully managed appearance, and asking honestly what you actually want, what feels like you, what you are doing for yourself versus what you are doing to remain acceptable to a gaze. The backlash is real. The woman who steps out of the box gets called difficult, not like other Eastern European women, as if that is an insult. She is judged for not being soft enough, not feminine enough, for letting herself go if she stops doing enough cosmetic procedures or lets her gray hair grow. The punishment for refusing the stereotype is social. It is designed to push her back in. I have struggled deeply with shame about where I came from. I still do sometimes. There are moments when I don't want to be associated with a stereotype at all, when I get defensive before anyone has even said anything, because I know what the assumption is before it arrives. It took me a long time to understand that people placing others into boxes according to stereotypes they carry in their heads is not my problem to solve. It is theirs. I can only be myself, and slowly I'm learning that where I come from is not the cage. The cage was what was built around it. Those are different things. Accepting where you come from, who you are, without shame, that is not small work. For me, it has been some of the hardest work of all. And it is lonely when you start building different identity from most people in your culture, when you stop fitting the expected shape, you lose belonging. I have felt lonely for most of my life, never quite fitting, never quite like everyone else around me. That loneliness is real and it does not fully go away. But for me, the alternative, shrinking myself to fit in, abandoning the questions that mattered most to me just to have more company, was never actually the option. The journey matters more to me than the comfort of fitting in. That is the choice I make every day, and some days it costs me more than others. To the women listening who recognize themselves in any of this, the stereotype, the box, the shame, the conditioning, the loneliness of stepping out, you are not the category. You never were. You are a specific, irreducible person from a specific place with a specific history. No one's assumption about where you come from have nothing to do with who you actually are. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Don't let them make you small. So if I could say anything to the version of myself who was just beginning to see the box, the one who felt the shame of where she came from, who got defensive, who was still performing and shrinking and trying to fit, it would be this. You have the right to not justify yourself, to not defend yourself, to not prove anything to anyone. The shame you feel about where you come from, about who you are, it was given to you. It doesn't belong to you. You don't need a rich husband to take care of you. You don't need to perform softness and femininity to be loved. You don't need male validation to know your own worth. And in fact, the moment you stop needing it, everything shifts. It is also okay to choose a life without a husband, without children. It is okay to be called difficult, a bitch, a gold digger. Those words only have power as long as you are afraid of them. And at some point you realize, let them say it, your peace is worth more than their approval. What she needs, what you need, is to peel back every layer. The good girl, the performance of femininity, the conditioning that told you your beauty was your only currency and that your survival depended on being chosen by a man, the trauma that made chaos feel like home and called it love. Peel it all back. Learn to feel safe inside your own body, your own presence, your own life. You can provide for yourself. You don't need a man to do it for you. You don't need to overextend in relationships, to give everything and keep nothing, to shrink yourself. Do the bare minimum for anyone who hasn't earned more. Focus on building your own life, your own goals, your own becoming. Your worth was never in your youth, your appearance, or whether a man chose you and decided to love you. Your worth was always there before him, without him, completely independent of him. And nothing you do or don't do can remove it from you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Until the next time, bye.